Hello class. In this video we are going to explore the concept of virtualization. Before we start this video, make sure that you take notes because this is important for you to understand for our further lectures. This course allows you the flexibility of using any form of Linux installation that you can think of. However, the de facto is virtualization. So part of the course is understanding virtualization. We are only going to cover the basics, so mostly because we don't have much time to go very in depth in virtualization, but the basics that we're going to cover here are good enough to give you a foundation so that you can continue working on. Also, you're going to be virtualizing operating systems throughout your entire career, so this is something that this is just an introduction. You will be able to fill in the blanks and do even more research past this. So with that said, let's get into the meat of the matter. What is virtualization? So virtualization is basically the replication of hardware to simulate a virtual computer. So virtualization allows you to create make-believe machines, right? So there are two general types of virtualization. So you have server-side virtualization and client-side. Now, what is the difference? Well, simple. Where is the virtualization taking place? Is the virtualization taking place on a server? Then it's server side. Is it taking place on a client? Then it's client side. And by a client, I mean a regular computer, just your regular desktop, laptop computer, right? And by server, I mean, well, a server. What else? Um, so here's an example of server-side virtualization, right? VDI is a great example, or virtual desktop infrastructure. This is what the college has. Those of you who have had the opportunity to go to be to go to the college in person, you might notice that in the schools, the classrooms do not have bulky desktops or laptops that you use. Instead, they have monitors like the one you see in this screen. This over here is what is called a thin client, right? Which is allows you to literally access a virtual machine that is being run at a data center somewhere, right? There are different types of the different elements for these VDI infrastructures, right? So you have your thick client or fat client, and that would be a regular computer with the software running on it that would allow you to connect to that server. You also have your thin client, which is a small computer with very little capability, that allows you to also access these data centers that contains these VMs. And you also have your zero client, which is the example of these monitors over here. That is an LG, and that's what pretty much we have at the college. That is just a monitor with a special board inside that allows you to connect to the server. Okay, so let's talk about client-side virtualization and what it is. So client-side virtualization is when the virtualization takes place in your local regular computer, in a regular computer, right? So how does it work? Well, you install a software in your computer that allows you to create and manage virtual machines, right? Each virtual machine has its own operating system isolated from your host computer. And by the way, the computer that is running this software is called the host computer, and the computer that is being virtualized is called the guest computer. So for client-side virtualization, a computer needs a hypervisor, which is just the software that is running and managing virtual machines, right? You also need hardware support, and by that I mean you need a decent CPU that can support virtualization, and you need enough RAM because while your virtual machine is running, it's taking real resources away from your computer, right? It's the computer might be made believe, but the resources are very much real, and the consumption of these resources is 100% real. So you need to have enough RAM and obviously enough storage because the virtual machine is consuming storage from your computer, right? So there are different types of hypervisors, right? You have type 1 and type 2. Now, what's the difference between type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor? So, a type 1 hypervisor runs directly on the computer, right? It's not an application that you install on your computer. No. It runs on the computer itself. So, it replaces the operating system. That computer that has a type 1 hypervisor doesn't have an operating system per se. You can say that the hypervisor is the operating system itself. You know, although some might require a partial operating system to operate, but that's the general idea of a type 1 hypervisor. It takes advantage of the entire hardware because it replaces or eliminates the need to have an actual operating system controlling the hardware. As you can see for the chart above, you have your host hardware or your host computer. Right on top, you have the hypervisor, and then you have the operating systems that are being virtualized, like the virtual machines that are being created. In a Type 2 scenario, in a Type 2 hypervisor, you need an operating system because a Type 2 hypervisor is an application that is installed in your computer. That is what we are going to be using in our class. We're going to be installing VirtualBox to create virtual machines, and that is a Type 2 hypervisor. There are many Type 2 hypervisors out there, right? You have Parallel, you have VirtualBox, like I said, VMware Pro and Player, you have VMware Fusion, you have Boxes, you have Libvirt, you have a lot of Type 2 hypervisors out there, right? So what are the benefits of virtualization? Because I have sold you this idea of virtualization, but what's the purpose? What's the point? Well, there are a lot of benefits to use virtual machines. Here's a couple of them. First of all, it allows you to run multiple operating systems in a single computer at the same time without needing to reboot, which is great because the idea of having multiple operating systems in a computer is not something new. Even virtualization is not new either. But before virtualization was as popular as it is now, or before it was supported the way it is now, which is you can run it anywhere, pretty much any desktop computer can virtualize at this point, um, you could do something called dual boot. And there are still people who dual boot. I have a computer that is dual booted. And what dual boot means is having two operating systems in the same hard drive, or more than two operating systems in the same hard drive. However, in order for you to use one or the other, you will need to reboot your computer to get into the other operating system. You can see how annoying that can be. Virtualization doesn't need that. Virtualization can have as many operating systems as your hardware supports simultaneously running. So it also allows applications to be tested before they are deployed to production. For example, you have an application that you're working on. You want to test it, and this application requires you to test it in a Linux server, right? You finish your application, you package it, and you want to test it. Do you grab that application and put it in the production server that is hosting your application at the moment? Or would you rather put it in a virtual machine, its own isolated sandbox environment, and observe and see if it breaks everything? That is the smartest choice, and virtual machines are great for that. You can also use it in other ways. For instance, maybe you downloaded an application for the internet and you're not sure if that application is legit. You might want to test it out. Maybe, there is a weird link and you don't know if that weird link might open something shady. You might want to test it out in a virtual machine. Maybe you want to test out the devastation effect of a particular computer virus. Or like you, as a student, you want to test things out. You don't want to break your computer all the time. A virtual machine is a great place for that because what happens in the VM, it stays in the VM, right? It's an isolated, sandboxed environment that remains there. So it also reduces the cost of physical hardware. And obviously, come on, think about it, right? If I needed 4 servers before, but I can virtualize 3 of the servers, I only need 1 server, right? Beautiful. Maybe my application needs a database server, a web server, and a mail server. But I can only buy 1 server and virtualize 3 operating systems on that server, and now I only need to buy 1. Obviously, it creates a single point of failure because if that 1 server dies, so your VMs do. But as a good system administrator, you might put, plans in place in case something like that happen, like backups, for example, or redundancy, or a RAID system, so that it is easy to recover data. Also, virtualization offers the chance to experiment with untested programs, right? Which is something that we mentioned before. So let's talk about the hypervisors, right? So VirtualBox, for example, VirtualBox is an open source application. It's a type 2 hypervisor, like we mentioned before. The great thing about VirtualBox is that it's super powerful. It has a crazy amount of features that you can do and a crazy amount of things that you can do with it. It runs on everything. Linux, Mac, Macintosh, Solaris, Open Solaris, BSD, anywhere. It runs anywhere, which is great because, for instance, if you use Microsoft Hyper-V, that only runs on Windows. So you are limited to where you can run it, right? If you use VMware, well, for Mac you need to install a different application, right? It becomes tricky because it might not be available everywhere. And now, what can you do? But VirtualBox, oh, that's the holy grail. That's available everywhere. And this is by far one of the most used type 2 hypervisors out there. As a student, you will use it a lot. So it's a good idea to get used to it early in your career. It also supports a very large number of guest operating systems, as you are going to experience soon. Also, we have Workstation Player. Back when I started teaching this course, I used to teach both simultaneously. But I realized soon that teaching Workstation Player was a waste of time. First of all, it's a very weak hypervisor in the sense that it has very little features. It's given away for free by VMware, for you to give it a try to their product. So, in all honesty, if you know how to use VirtualBox, chances are you know how to use Workstation Player, because Workstation Player is just that easy to use. Whereas VirtualBox, it requires a little bit of practice. So, that is it. And that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in a Slack, or you can message me privately if you don't want to do it in a public chat space. Don't forget to write notes on virtualization. Basically focus on what it is, uh, what type of hypervisors there are out there, what type of virtualization there is, and also, what different products for virtualization exist out there. If you have those three things in your notes, you are good to go. That's as much as you need to remember from this presentation. See you next time.